The Indiana Fever didn't just lose, they imploded. Despite holding control for most of the contest, the team unraveled in the most crucial stretch of their season, collapsing under pressure with a barrage of turnovers, missed free throws, and inexplicable substitutions. A team that had clawed its way into contention found itself silenced in the final minutes, not by the opponent's brilliance, but by its own indecision and poor execution. And at the center of the storm stood head coach Stephanie White.
If you're here for the real story and not the filtered version, subscribe. And if you're sticking around for the next meltdown, you better definitely subscribe.
In a season that saw Caitlin Clark emerge as one of the most electric rookies in league history, the decision-making from the sidelines became more questionable by the day. With Clark sidelined due to injury, the semifinal was a golden opportunity to showcase the rest of the roster, test flexibility, and adapt under pressure. Instead, White doubled down on her conservative approach, clinging to rigid systems while her team flailed. Veterans like Natasha Howard and Odyssey Sims watched critical minutes slip away from the bench. The offense stagnated. Defensive rotations grew predictable. Timeouts were used too late. And as the aces surged, the Fever failed to respond. Fans didn't hold back. Online forums and social media exploded with accusations. Everything from outdated tactics to whispers of sabotage. Why hadn't the offense been built around Clark from the start? Was White threatened by her star's popularity, or simply unwilling to reshape her system around a generational player? Becky Hammond coached circles around White in the semifinal. While Hammond adjusted seamlessly to every shift in tempo, every mismatch, White stayed static. And without their star guard on the court, the Fever's weaknesses were magnified. The offense became predictable. The defense scrambled. The clock drained, and with it, the season. This wasn't just a playoff loss. It was a referendum on the Fever's future. The coaching disconnect, the lack of strategic improvisation, and the underutilization of elite talent made one thing clear. Something had to change. When Sandy Brondello was announced as White's replacement, the message from the front office couldn't have been louder. The Fever weren't willing to risk Caitlin Clark's prime in a system that refused to evolve. Brondello, known for her ability to maximize star guards and run fluid, dynamic offenses, arrives with a mandate. Build around Clark, compete now, and never let another meltdown happen again. The WNBA isn't just watching. It's depending on this. Clark isn't just a player. She's a movement. And the Fever know that. The semifinal collapse wasn't just a game lost. It was an alarm bell. One that rang loud enough to shake the foundation of the franchise. Now, with Brondello at the helm, the rebuild isn't about starting over. It's about finally catching up to what the modern game demands: flexibility, fearlessness, and above all, faith in star power. And this time, there's no room for hesitation. It's official. Stephanie White is out. And Sandy Brondello, yes, that's Sandy Brondello, is stepping into the chaos that is the Indiana Fever just weeks after one of the most mind-numbing meltdowns the WNBA has seen in years. What started as a promising playoff run quickly spiraled into a full-blown disaster, with fans, analysts, and even some insiders pointing fingers directly at White's leadership, or lack thereof. And now, the damage control is in full swing. Let's rewind to the semifinals. The Indiana Fever weren't just competing. They were controlling the game. They had it. The pace, the momentum, the fans on their feet. Then, with minutes left on the clock and the Aces looking gassed, the Fever went cold. 9 minutes. 9 whole minutes without a single field goal. That's not just a drought. That's a desert. Add in missed free throws, boneheaded turnovers, and you're left wondering, who exactly was running the show? Well, that's where the real drama begins. Stephanie White, the head coach, had the clipboard, but her choices? Questionable at best, disastrous at worst. Rotations that made zero sense. Benching key players like Natasha Howard and Odyssey Sims in clutch moments. A refusal to adjust the offense, even with Caitlin Clark out of lineup. It wasn't just a bad game. It was a clinic in how to lose when you're supposed to win. And here's where it gets ugly. With Clark sidelined, you'd expect the Fever to lean on their veterans, get creative, maybe even take a few risks. Instead, White dug in, played it safe, Conservative play calling. No real adjustments. Just hoping the system will hold. Even though it was clearly falling apart. The fans saw it. The media saw it. The other team definitely saw it. What followed wasn't just a loss. It was a full-blown implosion that set off a firestorm of criticism. Social media exploded with calls for White's resignation. Analysts openly questioned whether she was trying to prove a point by not building the offense around Clark. Sabotage? Ego? Outdated philosophies? Whatever it was, it backfired. Here's the thing. Caitlin Clark isn't just another rookie. She's the draw, the ratings magnet, the league centerpiece. Whether you love her or love to hate her, the facts are the facts. When Clark's on the floor, people watch, people show up, and when she's off, the Fever just aren't the same team. That's why fans started digging deeper. Why was Clark's injury recovery so murky? Why did it seem like the team was almost reluctant to bring her back into the spotlight? Conspiracy theories started swirling. Was White trying to protect her system? Was she threatened by Clark's star power? Was she worried that if Clark carried the team, it would prove that the system itself was obsolete? Because let's be honest, this wasn't just about one game. It was about the entire trajectory of the team under White's leadership. A team that should have been built around Clark instead felt like it was built in spite of her. And when she wasn't there to bail them out, the system crumbled. No fluid offense. No in-game flexibility. Just confusion and missed opportunity. Meanwhile, over on the Aces bench, Becky Hammon was playing chess, adjusting on the fly, making smart rotations, exploiting every Fever mistake. It was a masterclass in coaching, and a brutal reminder of what Indiana could have had with the right leadership. The aftermath? Brutal. Stephanie White was immediately on the hot seat. The front office tried to play it cool at first, but the backlash was too loud to ignore. Fans weren't just disappointed. They were done. Done with conservative coaching. Done with ignoring star power. Done with watching their franchise fumble the future. And then came the announcement. Stephanie White out. Sandy Brondello in. Now that turned heads. Brondello isn't some experimental hire. She's a proven name. A coach who knows how to build around stars. Who's not afraid to shift her system. Who's shown time and time again that flexibility wins championships. If White was all about control, Brondello is about adaptability. And in a league that revolves around elite talent, that mindset shift might be exactly what Indiana needs. Because here's the harsh reality. The Fever didn't just lose a playoff series. They almost lost a narrative. When your star player becomes the face of the league, you cannot afford to sideline her, literally or figuratively. Clark wasn't just injured. She was iced out of the defensive scheme even before that. And when it mattered most, the team's refusal to pivot exposed everything that was broken behind the scenes. The lack of creativity, the fear of change, the obsession with maintaining control, even as the house was burning down. And if that sounds dramatic, this wasn't a simple case of bad luck. It was strategic paralysis. A franchise clinging to a system that clearly wasn't working, even when all signs pointed to a different direction. And when fans started speculating that Clark was being deliberately sidelined to avoid undermining the coach, that's when you know the trust is gone. Sandy Brondello's arrival signals a hard reset. It's a clear message. This team will no longer be defined by rigidity. Clark is the system now. And whether that means faster ball movement, more isolation sets, or just letting her cook from the logo, it's time for the Fever to stop pretending she's not the engine of the franchise. And if anyone knows how to make that work, it's Brondello. This isn't just about star power. It's about survival. In a league that's rapidly evolving, coaches who fail to evolve with it get left behind. And if Indiana had stuck with White any longer, they risked wasting the most marketable player to enter the league in a generation. Let's talk damage. The semifinal loss was painful, yes, but the deeper damage was psychological. You could see it. The hesitation, the second-guessing. Players didn't seem to trust the system or each other. And that's what happens when coaching decisions defy common sense. When your best scorers are sitting during crunch time. When your offense refuses to adapt to who's actually on the floor. That kind of mismanagement doesn't just lose games. It corrodes locker rooms. And it raises serious questions about what the Fever front office was thinking. How long did they plan to stick with White's vision? Were they blind to the disconnect? Or just hoping it would fix itself? Because make no mistake, the longer they delayed, the more they risked losing Clark. Not in a literal sense yet, but in the way that matters most, buy-in. You don't build a future by sidelining the future. And if Clark starts to feel like she's just a piece in someone else's puzzle, you're already losing her. Thankfully, the pivot happened before it was too late. So here we are, a season that began with promise, spiraled into disaster, and ended with a franchise-altering decision. Stephanie White gambled on control. Sandy Brondello's gambling on talent. And in today's WNBA, there's only one winning bet. The fans? They're watching. The league? Watching even closer. Because this saga wasn't just about Indiana. It was a microcosm of a bigger battle. The old guard versus the new era. System loyalty versus player empowerment. And in the end, the Fever made their choice. Whether it pays off will depend on what happens next. Will Brondello unlock Clark's full potential? Will the franchise rebuild trust with its fan base? Or will this be just another chapter in a story of missed opportunities? Only time will tell. But one thing is certain. You don't bench your future and expect to win. You build around it. So what do you think? Was Stephanie White sabotaging the offense to protect her system? Or was this just a classic case of outdated coaching finally catching up to her? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Hit that subscribe button for more deep dives. And don't forget, drama never rests in the W. Sandy Brondello may be stepping in now, but the scars from that semifinal collapse aren't just going to fade overnight. Indiana Fever fans are still reeling. The players? Probably just as confused. And the league office? You better believe they're sweating, because Caitlin Clark isn't just a rising star. She's a walking business model. And when the business model gets benched or mismanaged, heads roll. But before we dive too deep into the Brondello chapter, we have to fully close the book on Stephanie White. Let's talk about the vibes, because vibes matter. And during that playoff series, the vibes were rancid. You could feel the tension through the screen. Players hesitating to shoot. Running stagnant sets. White calling timeouts at weird moments. Then drawing up plays that looked more like high school drills than playoff-level execution. Like, are we really out here running side-to-side pick and rolls for the 15th time with no off-ball movement while down by double digits? It wasn't just ineffective. It was infuriating. And the worst part? You could almost feel the disconnect between White and the players. No fire. No urgency. Just a weird, robotic calm. Like she was trying to convince everyone, we're fine. Just trust the process. Spoiler. The process was broken. And maybe that's the real core of this drama. The refusal to let go of a system that clearly didn't fit the moment. Or the personnel. Coaches like Becky Hammond, they live in the moment. Adjust on the fly. They see a hot hand and ride it until the wheels fall off. Stephanie White? She saw a hot hand and subbed her out for matchup reasons. It was coaching by numbers instead of coaching by instinct. And in the playoffs, when games come down to a single possession, a single misrotation, or a single decision, that kind of rigidity is a death sentence. Now, let's address the elephant in the room. Caitlin Clark. If we're being honest, this collapse wouldn't have turned into a crisis if she weren't involved. But she was, and everything about her presence, or lack thereof, turned this from a disappointing playoff loss into a headline-dominating, franchise-defining controversy. Caitlin Clark is not just a star. She is the star. The reason ratings are up. The reason Fever games are suddenly selling out. She's single-handedly dragging the league into a new era of visibility, endorsements, and mainstream buzz. The idea that a coach could see all that, know all that, and still choose to sideline her from the team's offensive identity? It's baffling. It's beyond baffling. It borders on self-sabotage. And fans noticed. Oh, they noticed. You saw the Twitter threads, the Reddit breakdowns, the sports talk show rants. People were pulling clips, analyzing body language, time-stamping rotations like they were solving a crime. Because to a lot of fans, this didn't just feel like bad coaching. It felt intentional. And whether or not that's true almost doesn't matter. In today's sports world, perception is reality. If your fans believe you're sabotaging the future of their team, or worse, the league's biggest draw, you're done. And once that narrative started catching fire, White's days were numbered. It didn't help that her post-game interviews were about as inspiring as a weather report. No accountability. No real explanation. Just vague statements about execution and learning opportunities. Ma'am, this isn't a preseason scrimmage. It's the playoffs. The opportunity was right there. You blew it. And the front office? Silent. Radio silent. Which only made things worse. Because when leadership disappears during a crisis, the narrative runs wild. Was Clark being held back to preserve her for next season? Was there fear she might re-aggravate the injury and derail her sophomore campaign? Was White trying to avoid the optics of being carried by a rookie? These questions didn't come out of nowhere. They came from silence and from actions that just didn't make sense. Let's not sugarcoat it. The absence of Caitlin Clark in the offensive blueprint, even before the injury, was a coaching equivalent of unplugging your Wi-Fi during a live stream. And when you got someone like Brondello stepping in who thrives with high IQ, high usage guards, the contrast couldn't be more glaring. Because Sandy, she's not here to manage egos. She's here to maximize them. And that brings us to the Fever's future, which is suddenly, finally, looking a little less grim. The Brondello hire is more than just a coaching change. It's a philosophical reset, an acknowledgement that the old ways, they're not working. That in today's WNBA, you can't win by suppressing your best talent. You win by unleashing it, surrounding it with the right pieces, building a team that works in harmony with the star, not around her, not above her, but with her. Think about what Brondello did with Skylar Diggins-Smith, with Diana Taurasi. She knows how to handle big personalities, big games, and big expectations. She doesn't flinch. She adapts, and she wins, which is exactly what the Fever need right now. Because let's be real, the franchise cannot afford to mess this up again. They've already wasted one playoff run. They've already alienated a chunk of their fan base. They're this close to being seen as a team that fumbled the Caitlin Clark era before it even began. That's not just embarrassing. It's dangerous. For the franchise and for the league. This isn't about hype anymore. It's about legacy. You either build around a generational player, or you get bulldozed by the teams that do. And yes, there's going to be pressure. On Brondello. On Clark. On the front office. Everyone's watching now. Every move will be dissected. Every substitution questioned. But the upside? Massive. If Brondello gets this right. If she finds a way to blend Clark's explosiveness with veteran savvy, builds a system that moves instead of stagnates, and actually empowers the talent instead of controlling it, we could be looking at the start of something huge. Not just for the Fever, but for the entire WNBA. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. This franchise still has some major cleanup to do. Rebuilding trust with the fans. Repairing the locker room culture. Reassessing player roles that were clearly mismanaged. And most of all, making it clear that Caitlin Clark isn't just a piece of the puzzle. She is the puzzle, the cornerstone, the vision. Because if you don't treat your best player like your best player, someone else will. And then it's game over. So now we wait. The storm has passed, but the damage is still being tallied. White is gone, Brondello's in, and the league is holding its breath. Because this wasn't just a coaching change. It was a turning point. And the Fever? They've got one shot to get this right. The Indiana Fever didn't just fire a coach. They staged a mid-season exorcism. The ghosts of bad decisions, stagnant offense, and system over stars mentality have haunted this team long enough. And the Brondello hire was the organizational equivalent of burning sage and throwing out the blueprint. But here's where it gets even more intense. Because when a franchise dumps a head coach after a playoff appearance, not before, not after losing season, but after making it to the semifinals, you know the rot went deeper than wins and losses. This wasn't about the record. It was about how they got there, and more importantly, how they left. That semifinal collapse wasn't just embarrassing. It was a warning sign flashing in neon. Every possession that ended in a shot clock violation, every timeout that came too late, every decision that bent a hot hand, It all screamed one thing. This team wasn't being coached to win. It was being coached to preserve a philosophy, a system, a comfort zone. And when that comfort zone blew up under playoff lights, White had nowhere to hide. What's wild is that even with Caitlin Clark off the floor, the Fever still had enough talent to compete. But did White tap into it? No. Instead of letting Sims push tempo or giving Howard the freedom to dominate inside, the offense crawled, played scared, played predictable, like they were waiting for someone else to save them. But the someone they needed was already sitting in sweats on the bench. And now the Fever pitch, pun fully intended, reaches a new level with Brondello, because she's not coming into a quiet rebuild. She's walking into a media circus, a team under a microscope. Every game will be dissected. Every quote from Clark will be analyzed for passive-aggressive jabs. Every substitution will trend on X. Welcome to the spotlight, Sandy. Hope you brought your shades. And yet, there's hope again. Because finally, it feels like Indiana gets it. That you don't drag your team into the future by clinging to the past. That you don't win in today's WNBA by running rigid sets and ignoring the talent that makes fans care. You win by empowering your stars. By building around the players who make jaws drop and highlight reels explode. You win by giving Caitlin Clark the keys and letting her drive. Look, this isn't a fairy tale yet. Brondello has work to do, trust to rebuild, a roster to realign. But the path is clearer now than it's ever been. The Fever finally did something bold, something necessary, something that says, we're not here to manage expectations. We're here to win. Let's see if they mean it. Now tell me in the comments, was White doomed from the start? Is Brondello the savior the Fever needed, or just the next name in a long line of scapegoats? Hit that subscribe button and come back for the next meltdown, because in this league, one bad quarter can cost you everything. And we're watching every second.